I'm Peter Rankin, and I first came here in 1964 as a schoolboy who was sort of, taking time out when I shouldn't have done, because Joan Littlewood allowed me to come to rehearsals of Henry IV, which was going to the Edinburgh Festival. And she then went away for 3 years, and I then came back in 1967 and sort of never went away. Because I assisted her in taking down improvisations and acting. And the last play that Joan ever directed was by me, which was a satire on filmmaking in 1973. And after Jerry Raffles, her partner, died, I carried on working here with Ken Hill, who was a writer and a director. And the shows we did here, among them were the original Phantom of the Opera and The Invisible Man. So that's kind of my association with this place, and it goes back quite a long way. Now, if you wanted a kind of wow moment, that came earlier in 1963 when Over to Lovely War was on at the Wyndham's Theatre, and they were doing a children's show at Christmas, just to sort of almost to fill in the time. And this was called The Merry Roosters Pantone. It was the plot of Cinderella. And I went to that, having seen Over to Lovely War, but this was the show where this extraordinary spontaneity and warmth came out into the auditorium, and I was absolutely hooked. And then a few months later, Joan was directing some commercials for eggs in the East End. My father was the producer, and he said, "Oh, I'm doing this, do you want to be there?" And I was. And at the end of the shoot, I said to Joan that I was very interested in theatre, and she said, "Oh, don't get stage struck, get science struck." And I said, "I'm already doing science, and I know that I'm no good at it." And that is why she invited me to the rehearsals of Henry IV. So that's my kind of introduction. Yes, it was that sort of wow moment that made me come back later. And so from 67, I did all sorts of things. The thing is that I'd never been in professional theatre before coming here. So I knew nothing about what other people did, about how they learnt their lines, they learnt their moves, and that's how they did it. Rep. I knew nothing about it. I'd never been to a rep. So Joan was the be-all and end-all of how you did it. And then it was only years later you realise, no, that's not what anybody else did at all. Because, for instance, on the first day that I was allowed in, they were rehearsing, as I said, Henry IV on the stage. But there was none of that business of putting chalk marks on the floor to say this is this and this and that. They were actually sitting the wrong way round, with benches facing the other side of the stage. And the actress just sitting on the stage, Joan getting up and talking, and then she'd organise very quickly an improvisation that matches a scene in Henry IV. A couple of actors, Murray Melvin, Victor Spinetti, they get up, they improvise it. And so we sort of gradually got into the scene. And then if a scene was going difficult, but not well, she would say, "Okay, do it all in gibberish." And so Brian Murphy was playing Worcester, the whole scene where they work out that they're going to have a battle when they really should not be having a battle was at first done in gibberish to get the overall shape of the scene. That there was no putting anybody anywhere. That happened in Edinburgh, where we were actually working on a Traverse stage, nothing like the stage here. And very quickly Joan organised it she never told anybody where to be, but they were always in the right place. That was the curious thing about her, because she was very good at that. And so you spent all the rehearsal period doing all these interesting things and playing games of these, but they were always appropriate to what the play was, not like directors who make them do any old exercise for no obvious reason. Everything was there for a reason. I had many roles. No, the first thing that I began to do was to take, you see, Joan, as I said, did improvisations, and so, but she would make the actors do them more than once, so that it began to become sort of fixed in their heads. Some people used to say, "Oh, Joan Littlewood's actors go on at 7:30 and make it all up." which is absolutely not true at all. It wasn't made up like that at all. I mean, occasionally an actor might ad-lib something, but the show stayed the same. And so I would take down the improvisation and get them right by listening them to the actors doing it a few times, so that I didn't even have to know shorthand. So that was one of my first jobs. Then I just acted because she needed somebody to walk across the stage, which I worked very hard at. And even so, she would, on one occasion, it was a pub scene, and I thought, well, I'll sort of lean over and like that. She said, what on earth are you doing? And she said, in this age, which was Henry IV, she said, everybody stood up straight. I mean, they might have a knife stabbed in their back, but there was no Freudian like that. And so that was how I sort of began to learn about acting. And then, as I said, I wrote this play, which was, I'd been filming in Rome, and it was so funny and so ridiculous that I wrote it all down, and Joan directed it as a play. I can't say it was, well, the thing is, it was very slender. And so I don't think it was worth a full evening's entertainment, but it was the last play she directed. You see, in those days, nowadays you see an awful lot of people walking around with these microphones. And so that, for instance, at technical rehearsals, that was all done by, you see, after all these lovely weeks of doing this, that and the other, Joan could pull a show together in about 3 days. That was the job that most directors used to spend 3 weeks or 6 weeks doing. She would sit in the circle and be quite savage, saying, no, do it again. And so it was all done by, we didn't have all these microphones cooing away. And so that's how, there wasn't quite a fair amount of shouting. Also, you see, the wardrobe was right up at the top. But if you yelled out loudly enough, because communication in a theatre very often breaks down, and you know, you need to tell props, you need to tell costumes what you've done during the day. Well, in this case, if you said it loud enough, costumes could hear you say, no, that bit's cut. And they say, oh, we don't need to make that costume. So it was all very sort of human and organic. So there was that. I mean, for instance, I came in here today and everything is under lock and key. Nothing was under lock and key. Admittedly, there was an awful lot of thefts, but it was, you know, you could just walk into the theatre. I mean, they didn't, but you could. Because Joan would throw you out double quick. It was amazing. She did not throw me out. I once wrote to her and said, can I come to rehearsal? She said, yes, but if you're invisible. And so I did. That's how I got back here in 1967 and, you know, began to be put into plays and things. Well, there was something you were asking me about, which was to do with community. And in 1967, in the summer, and there was not much going on, she noticed that there was a little area which was an absolute rubbish dump. And she thought, I'm going to clean that rubbish dump up and turn it into a little playground for children. And she did. And the weird thing is, there were a lot of people who came to complain. And you thought, why are you complaining that the rubbish dump is no longer there? And one chap came along and he announced himself. He said, I am a common docker. And all the kids actually used to send him up about that. That common docker ended up working in the bar. So that, now Joan had an expression, which was the figure of 8, which she said meant if you push energy out, energy will come back in. And that is a very good example of it. And also, the little children having this playground made the older children, the teenagers, say, well, what about us? And so Joan then invited them into the theatre where they did these improvisations, which I took part in and worked on, and they were absolutely fabulous. Now, those children would now be in their late 60s, but they never, if you ever meet them, they will never forget that time. It was only one summer, but they will never forget that time when they came in and improvised. For instance, she said, what did you do today? And somebody said, oh, I had my first day's work. And he said, what was it like? It was bloody awful. Okay, you be the boss and you be him. And we would play it out. And they could improvise. Actors, professional actors don't tend to improvise for a very long time, but they could improvise for ages and ages. I once came in on something, I thought it was a play, because I just came into the circle and and it went on and on. It was absolutely brilliant. And so that was the way Joan kind of was able to get into the community, because she really did get into the community and the community came in. And also, I think the discipline of the theatre made them behave slightly better. For instance, she did get a building where we carried on with these improvisations, but it was a tatty building, and it didn't work. And I thought, you need the discipline of the theatre, because there was a show on at the time, the Murray Lloyd story, and she put some of those children in it, and then they began to learn about things like timing. So she got one boy to play somebody who knocks on her dressing room door. Miss Lloyd, you're on. And she'd say, now wait until Murray answers, don't just carry on. And so she was beginning to teach them how to time something. So they loved being in it, and also they memorized loads of it. So but there was the discipline of actors doing the show on the stage, and that gave them, they were a little bit respectful. Outside they were not respectful, and it all fell apart, which was a shame. But nevertheless, as I said, they remembered it to this day. And I think it had a big influence on them, because some of them have gone out into the wide world and done all sorts of much more interesting things than they would have done. See, I think Philip Headley witnessed some of that, not all of it, some of that, and was intent on carrying on. And it was he who spotted that the population of Stratford, because you see, it was all old Cockney girls and boys when I came here, but he was the one who spotted that a lot of black people were coming, and therefore started to introduce black work, black actors, and the whole thing that Philip championed, and which people disapproved of to start with, because he was in a way he was following on in Joan's footsteps by looking out and drawing in from what was going on around him. Well, the trouble is, by that time I was in them. No, I do remember she came back in 1970 to do Ken Hill's first play here, and I thought it was absolutely a scream. And it was called Forward Up Your End, and it was about Birmingham County Council. And it was so witty and so clever, and then the critics didn't like it. And I came again, and the poor show had died. But I don't forget that night, because I wasn't in that show, and coming back after years of Joan being away and me doing something else, it was fabulous. And then she went on to do another thing about the Ronan Point, which was it was called The Projector. And what she did, she wasn't allowed to do a show about Ronan Point, and I used to go to the hearings for that and take them down, and Joan then was able to use them. But you weren't allowed to do a show about that at that time. So she pretended that there was this 18th century play about a guy who built a rubbish building. So that's the way she got it on, and that's what she did next, and I came to watch. And again, I did enjoy that, though it did remind me of a restoration comedy that I had been in that we'd done, because she used slightly the same style of, how it looked and how it worked. That was, and Jean Boat was in that, and she went on, and Carl Davis, her husband-to-be, did the music, and that's how they came together. I come to the pantos, but I chiefly come from Michael Burtonshaw, who was the most fabulous Dane, and he and also, funny enough, there's an actor that Philip Headley, he's an old friend of his, Brown Prothero. Now, Brown Prothero played the wicked stepmother in Cinderella here, and it was quite the best performance he had given in his whole life, and it was extraordinary. And it also chimed in with something that Philip had said about Brown, which is, though he has the look of a leading man, he's actually better in character. For instance, he had done a play with him where they wore masks, and he said he was brilliant at that. And him having to play this appalling woman absolutely suited him down to the ground. So there were these moments of delight that you got every now and again. And as for Michael Burtonshaw, as his Dane, was just fabulous. And terribly fun in his way of talking. You see, he would come out and talk to the audience and give them lectures and things, and the lectures would go on and they got funnier and funnier. And I thought he was great. Yes, one is that it's happy architecturally. There's a lovely relationship between the audience and the stage and the actors, and there's a certain position on the stage which Joan pointed out to us. And if you're there, you've got the house. You could be in a lot of theatres where you could walk all over it and you say, I don't sense where I am or how I fit in and how I can, all that. It's not there. So it's that. It's one of the hardest theatres in the country to run, because Jerry Raffles, Joan's partner, told me that they had things like what they used to be, the Lionel Bart Frank Norman musical here. It ran packed for 14 weeks, didn't make a penny. And that is why they had to keep bunging shows into the West End to make money to keep the place going, and which wore Joan down. And so she got, in 61, she got so fed up with it. So there was that to it. Yes, and as for what Stratford East did for me,
yes,
was that had I not come here, I wouldn't have known anything about the East End. It taught me about the East End, and I'm really grateful for that. And also, most of my work in theatre has been here, so there hasn't been many other places, haven't been many other places. So, it is, in that sense, yes, it is special.